Okay, so back to making tubes for motor sticks. So here's a completed tube. You can see here that it's very hard to see it probably, but I have glued the seam right along there using thin CA. And so I'm just going to show you how I do that real quick. The tools I need for doing that are this guy. This is a handy CA applicator, which is just basically a rod with a little needle sticking out and a little gap at the end here. The way you could make one for yourself is to go to your wife or mother's sewing box and to steal a needle from it and cut the end off, cut the top off, so that you end up with a little fork, a two-pronged fork. And that two-pronged fork will, you can shove that into the end of like a little bit of dowel. And then what you can do is the little gap here, the little fork, allows you to pick up using surface tension and capillary pressure or suction. It picks up some CA, and you have a little drop of CA caught between the tines of the little fork, and then you could take that little drop of CA and apply it to a joint. So it's a good way for building anything that's very, very fine. That little tool is good. And of course, you can imagine, right, this thing eventually gets clogged up. The great thing about having something out of metal like this is that you can hit it with a little blowtorch or a lighter or any kind of flame, and it'll evaporate. It'll burn off the crystallized CA, cyanoacrylate, and be nice and clean again and ready for your next project. Okay, so those are the tools. I've also got a little bottom of a yogurt, or in fact this is the bottom of a cream container with like a little dish here. And so I'm going to put some thin CA in that dish so that I've got a little reservoir that I can dip my fork into. What else? And then I've got a blank here. This is slightly bigger than the diameter of the tube itself, and you'll see that helps me sort of keep it straight and hold the tube as I'm working. So this is just out of the oven, so essentially same process. This is the one I made in my last video, and so now I'm going to release it from its paper prison. Hopefully, it's been in the oven for several hours, so it should be nice and baked and ready to go. Okay. Okay, good. Oh, there's the wood showing up. Oh, it feels dry. Yep. So now I can see if I can. The trick with these things is getting them to slide off. Try to push out the brass rod there in the middle. So. Let's try going the other way. Gotta be careful here because don't want to damage my tube. I just need to be able to slide it out or off of the paper. Trying to figure out how to do that. One way would be to push the brass tube out from inside. But that seems to be firmly in there. Oh, of course it is. You know, the brass tube won't slide out because, of course, it's taped to the paper, so that ain't gonna work. I guess for starters, I can just cut away all of this excess paper here, so I don't have to hold it all the time. Get rid of that. Okay, that's the first step, and then the last one came off quite nicely. Maybe just kind of twist it slightly to get it to release from the paper. See if I can, yeah, I feel it kind of cracking loose a bit there. I can feel it sliding on the inside of the tube. So it's there. Oh, it's starting to loosen up. So yeah, with this kind of thing, you know, it's fragile, of course, so you just have to be patient and slowly work it loose. Hopefully now it's ready to move. Nope, not yet. Keep working on it. Try again. Nope. Oh, this is pretty stubborn here. I feel like I can almost pull it out sideways. I saw I've seen at least one instructions for doing this where the instruction was not to tape the tube to the paper, or the blank to the paper, but to just use saliva to wet the paper. And then presumably that all dries up. I'm just making a mark to see if I'm making any progress in actually sliding this out of here. There we go. Now it's starting to move. Now I have the problem that I've need to make sure that I don't catch it on the paper at the end here, which has got, of course, tape in it. There we go. And so there's the tube. So you can see here, there's the blank taped to my paper. Strip all that off. There'll be some tape. The glue of the tape actually gets left on the blank, so you have to make sure you clean that off before you make your next motor stick. But I'll leave that for now. Tackle that later. Okay, so now we're at the stage where we've got a tube. You can see that it's obviously still needs to be cemented together or glued together. And so this is where using another blank, an oversized blank, comes in handy. So I'm going to slide this in. And you can see here that it's just big enough that it's, in fact, this is almost exactly the right size. I could actually, yeah. So that's good. And so what I'm going to do is, obviously, if I try to glue this on this carbon blank here, there's a good chance that I will permanently affix my tube to the carbon rod, right? So you don't want to do that. So the best way to do that is to be able to slide this off the end of the rod and glue along the seam off the end of the rod. The problem you'll run into is that depending on how good it is, it's hard to pinch this together and get a good seam, because when you're pinching, you're sort of pressing from the side. You're distorting the tube from the side, which makes it into an oval shape, right? So you need something that contracts the tube in all directions. And what I found works really well for that is a dental band. Any kind of very tiny rubber band, like these little dental bands. I use these on my band burner timers. Well, they serve the additionally handy purpose of being pretty good for this job as well. So, oops. So you can roll those on there. And then what this does is it essentially squeezes the edges of the tube together so you get a nice perfect seam. I'm going to increase see here. Yeah, I'm going to double up. See, so there you can see the seam. And so now all I have to do is put a drop of CA and slowly but surely move along. So I'm going to just show you a couple of these and then I'll stop the video. So the final result after you've done the whole tube is a seam like that. Okay, it's basically almost invisible. And the tube is reasonably straight. It's not perfectly straight, but it's pretty close. Not being perfectly straight is fine. You just set it up so that if the rubber is going to be on this side, I set it up so that the bow in the tube is away from the rubber, right? So that the rubber will pull against the bow and essentially straighten the tube. So a slight bow in the tube is actually, you can use it to your advantage. All right, so I'm going to just do a couple of these little glue dots. I actually use, to help me with this, I'll use a pair of magnifiers. Adjust to my head. And this just helps me see exactly, this is going to be tricky around there. So where's my seam? I can't even see the seam here. There it is. Move it over here. So once I'm happy, I roll the rubber down a little bit. Put glue in the places it doesn't work. If you find, like with my last tube, I found that one side was up relative to the other side. There was a little step. I would just use the edge of this little needle to smooth it so that they were level with each other, so that I could get a nice flush joint. Sometimes I'd use the needle to kind of massage the one edge into place. And so you basically just go along now and essentially repeat this process all the way down the tube. Careful not to glue your rubber to the tube. So here I'm just pushing down on one side to get them flush, even with each other. Make sure to always pull the tube out so that you don't end up accidentally gluing your motor stick to the blank on the inside. I've actually made a mistake here, so something for you to be aware of. I didn't notice as I was going along that it actually overlapped here. So the stick is wider here where I've got the ends glued together and narrower here because it's overlapping. It's not the end of the world. I'm just going to continue with it like that. And this will be the front of the motor stick where my prop is and everything, and then it'll just get narrower along here. Okay, so basically I repeat that process now all the way until I get all the way to the end of the motor stick, and then it's done. I just sand the joint, smooth it out so that it's hard to even see it, and job done. Then it's ready for the next step.